Hey everyone, so we're going to take a look at the solution today of the problem that I posted at the start of this week. So it was the cookie problem. So just to go over it, there was some cookie jar and it had some initial amount of cookies, and that's what the problem is asking us to find. We want to find the initial amount of cookies that was in the jar. But the amount of cookies went through a certain process. The process was that first Harold had taken every single cookie that was initially in the jar and put them into 3 piles, equal piles, with none left over. So what that means is whatever amount of cookies that is in the jar has to be a multiple of 3 because there's no left over. He keeps one of the piles and puts the other 2 piles back. Then Lucy does the same thing, except of course Lucy is going to have a smaller amount of cookies because Harold had already taken one. And then finally Livio does the exact same thing, except when he does it, there's 1 extra cookie. Okay, and when we're done, there was 10 cookies left in the jar. Okay, so let's take a look. The idea here to this problem is that we're going to have to work backwards in order to solve it. So we know that we ended up with 10 cookies. And those 10 cookies came from having 3 equal piles and then 1 left over. So we know this pile was 1, right? That was the extra leftover cookie. So whatever this one is and whatever this one is went to Livio. And then these 2 contributed to the 10 left over. Well, if they were equal piles, if those 3 were equal piles, what's the only number that can take this one and add to 10? Well, of course, it's going to be 5. If they're equal piles, it has to be 5 and 5. So if these 2 are 5, then that third equal pile must also be 5. So Livio ended up with 6 total cookies. Okay? So what we have to do now is we need to consider the step before Livio. So how many cookies did Livio have available to him at the beginning of his method of separating them into the piles? Well, he had all of these added together. So he had 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 1, which of course gave him 16. So he ended up with 16. Actually here, I'm going to do this. It's going to be a little easier. I'm going to put this at the bottom because we're working backwards. So let's go like this. So he had 16 total, right? And the 16 went to there. Okay, so before Livio, we had Lucy. And Lucy had 3 equal piles, but she kept one of them, which means this 16 was created using that pile and that pile. And they were also equal piles. So what are the only 2 numbers that are equal to one another that when we add them together give us 16? Of course, it's 8. So this had to be 8 and this had to be 8. And it said from the question that Lucy could create 3 equal piles. So we know that this pile that Lucy kept was also 8. Okay, So now we can go to the last step for Harold. So how many cookies did Harold, who was the first person, leave for Lucy to create her piles with? Well, it was all 3 of these. So Lucy was left with 8 plus 8 plus 8, of course, is 24. Okay, so that means, and then this 24 came from the 3 piles that Harold had left over. So Harold kept one of the piles, which means that 24 was created using the other 2 piles. And again, they were equal piles. So what 2 numbers that are equal to one another add to make 24? Of course, that's going to be 12. And if the third pile is also equal, then we know Harold got 12. And Harold started with the initial amount of cookies in the jar, and the initial amount of cookies in the jar is made up of all 3 of these piles. So the initial amount of cookies in the jar has to be 12 plus 12 plus 12, which gives us 36, which is a multiple of 3, which is what we said that we were looking for when we started this question, because Harold was able to create 3 equal piles, and so was Lucy. And Lucy started with 24, which is also a multiple of 3. The only person who didn't get a multiple of 3 was Livio. He got 16, and because of that, he was not able to make 3 equal piles. He had a remaining 1 cookie left over. So Livio got 6, Lucy got 8, Harold got 12, and the initial amount of cookies in the jar was 36. All right, so I hope you guys were able to work through that one. I'll see you guys next week for the next one.